Eat, Drink and Be Buried is the fourth of 5 Gourmet Detective Mystery films, and I'm really glad that this is the penultimate one because on its own, it's not too bad, and certainly it's significantly better than the previous film, but as part of a series, it's terrible. I feel like the writers only know one way to tell a story. If you're going to create a series of stories, there needs to be some difference in the way things develop. And that's not the case here. And I will explain with a spoiler warning what I mean by that in a little bit, but this will be spoiler free for a moment. As I said, it is better than the previous film, but Henry is still one of the most irritating, obnoxious characters I've ever had the displeasure of watching. And there are some other issues as well that I can mention that aren't spoilers, but then I'll give a spoiler warning and go into more detail. This was released in 2017, it's directed by Marc and stars, of course, Dylan Neal as Henry and Brooke Burns as Maggie. And I want to say, as much as I detest Henry, literally one of the worst characters I've ever had to sit through, Dylan Neal's performance is brilliant. And there's one point in this actually where I thought his reaction was amazing. And I will credit where it's due, give an example of that in a little bit. So I have nothing wrong with performances. Henry is just one of the most irritating characters ever. And he doesn't even need to be in this story because the crime has nothing to do with food. He knew the people involved, so he could offer some information, but, well, I'll explain some of the irritating things he does in a moment. But he's at an event with his friend. It's his friend's birthday party, this big, extravagant affair. Really interesting beginning. Loads of people, gorgeous scenery, lovely set designs, everything looks fantastic. And then somebody is shot. And I won't say how it happens, but it's done in a way that's mysterious. And it's unclear how it could have possibly happened. And obviously, with Henry knowing the family, he thinks there are certain people who definitely couldn't be involved. He doesn't understand why somebody would do this because it's one of David's family members who is shot. He just doesn't understand how this could have happened. So we do have somebody saying, well, this doesn't make any sense straight away. And then obviously for us as a viewer, we then believe that. So if the family aren't responsible, who could it have been? Or is it somebody in the family? And obviously I'm not going to say, and I will say that part of the narrative was well written, it was well developed. It wasn't the most interesting, it wasn't the most suspenseful, but we had a decent assortment of suspects. Some of them had pretty decent motives. Those were well written, and I bought it. I believed the suspects could have all been responsible. I was buying into that narrative without any issue. The issues that I had mostly revolve around Henry and then the ending. And I will, of course, spoil those with a warning in a moment. But I also want to point out that while the narrative is well written, the verbal grammar, the dialogue is really poor. For a professional writer to write dialogue and have so many verbal inaccuracies, it's not great. And that's only ever acceptable if the characters are supposed to come off as being uneducated. Obviously, that's not the case here, so there's no excuse for them to be making so many grammatical errors in their speech. I say so many, it's not like it's every other sentence, but it was enough for me to begin to get irritated by it. So that's just another sign that it's not very well written. This one, as I said, is better than the previous film. It is better written. It's a better structured narrative. The suspects are more interesting, but I still wouldn't say it's a brilliant story. It's very slow. It takes a long time to get anywhere. We also have, well, I won't say exactly who, I won't spoil it, but, well, actually I will, because I need to explain something that Maggie did that really irritated me, but in order to do that, I need to spoil it. So I will give a spoiler warning now. I think I have one more thing to praise that is a spoiler. 2 more things, actually, because there's the reaction of Henry that I want to praise as well. And then a few things that I just thought were really terrible and just some things that really irritated me. So do I recommend it? It's better than the previous film. So if you liked the previous film, you might really enjoy this one. It's maybe better than the second film, but not as good as the first film. But Henry is getting increasingly annoying. He called himself a detective at one point. I can say that, it's not a spoiler because he's not a detective. he goes up to this potential suspect, or somebody, not necessarily a suspect, but somebody they want to get information out of, and he introduces himself as detective. And that could really cause some problems. And he's an idiot. And I hate him. And honestly, I genuinely believe that if this series was longer than 5 films, I couldn't suffer through anymore. I will watch the last one, but Henry is obnoxious, big-headed. He doesn't belong with any of these cases. He does not have the expertise. He is full of himself. He is not a likeable character at all. And it's a shame, because when I started watching it, I praised the fact that we had a male sleuth and a female detective, because usually with Hallmark films, certainly with the more recent mysteries, it's the other way on. And unfortunately, it's not worked out very well at all. So spoilers from now, a couple of things to praise, a couple of things that are just horrendous. And the things I want to praise, first of all, there is a car crash, and it was amazing. It's very brief, but it's very effective. It made me jump, or at least jolt. I don't know if I jumped as such, but I certainly jolted, and it was very impressive. What annoyed me about Maggie on one occasion, up until this point, she's been pretty likeable. Henry is not, but Maggie is actually quite a nice character. But she basically had a temper tantrum because Henry didn't tell her that his father was visiting. Henry and his father have an estranged relationship, and Maggie wasn't told his father was around. So instead of saying, hey, what's wrong with your relationship with your father? Do you want to talk about it? She literally stormed off and had a temper tantrum because Henry didn't tell her something that he didn't want to talk about. So that was exceptionally entitled, and I hated her action there. But thankfully, generally, she's a likeable character. One other good thing, but I need to explain the other bad thing first. Yet again, 4 films in a row, we have the culprit pointing a gun at one of our protagonists, and then at the 11th hour, somebody comes in and saves the day. That is the same way the previous 3 films have all ended. Every single film has ended in the exact same way. And I knew as soon as Maggie went towards the barn, I knew what was going to happen. I knew it would be the same, and I just don't understand how writers can sit down and write films for a series and go, I know what will be suspenseful, I know what viewers will enjoy, let's give them identical endings. Who thought this was a good idea? Do they not know that there are more ways to solve a crime than have one of your protagonists with a gun pointing at them? It's not suspenseful at this point. And part of me thinks I'll be devastated if the 5th and final film doesn't end that way, because it will be a very amusing way, because I will laugh at how bad it is and how ridiculous it is and how terrible the writers are at constructing a decent ending to a film. Maybe the writers are good at writing the beginning and the middle. I mean, they're not, because the films are pretty terrible. But even if that were the case, bring somebody else in who can write a solid ending, because the people involved in these 4 films don't seem to realise that they're a series of films and that they all need to have a slightly different ending. Not just, it's another ending, we'll have the culprit pointing a gun at either Maggie or Henry. Why not? It worked in the previous 3 films. No, it didn't. It worked in the first film. The second film, I thought it was just a bad coincidence. And then the third film, I thought, okay, they just don't know how to write an ending to a film that's different to the previous ones. They literally only have one way to end a film. And that makes me, as a professional writer, infuriated. Because there are so many talented writers out there. I'm not a screenwriter, I'm not one of them for this job, but there are so many talented writers out there who could clearly do a significantly better job. And that's not been an opportunity for them. And then you include things like the grammatical errors in the characters' dialogue, and then the slow narratives. The previous film was horrendous. The writing across the board has been pretty despicable. But, as I said, there was a positive thing connected to that ending. When the gun was pointed at Henry, it was pointed at Maggie, and then the gun was swung round. I'm trying to not say who the culprit was, just on the off chance you still don't want to know this, but the culprit was holding the gun at Maggie, and then they swung it around and pointed it at Henry, but it was so quick. And Dylan Neal's reaction to that was so believable and so genuine. and it was just fantastic. So really thoroughly wanted to praise him for that because I thought it was a brilliant moment. But the actual ending, I just don't understand why you would do 4 films in a row as part of the same series with the exact same ending. The culprit points the gun at one of the protagonists, the other one comes along and saves them. Not for 1 second am I surprised that these terribly written films with an obnoxious protagonist didn't last for a sustainable series. I will watch the next film. I will go into it with an open mind, as I did with this one. This one was an improvement on the 3rd film, so maybe the next and final one will be an improvement on this one. Wishful thinking. All I want is a different ending. That's all I want. The narrative can be dire, the suspects can be boring. Just give me a different ending and restore my faith in professional writing, because up until this point, it's pretty embarrassing.